Kizaru reminds me of people that have given in to the indulgence of their narcissistic desires out of a sense of self-preservation rather than believing in a more optimistic, hopeful, liberating future that we desire in real life, and we also desire for Luffy and friends to achieve in the world of One Piece. If Kizaru was a real person, I would personally dislike them. And because of that, I'm going to give them the most disrespectful lens of analysis that I know how to do. It's going to be a Freudian analysis, and I'm going to spare him of doing an analysis on like penis envy or an Oedipus complex, and instead I'm going to focus on the psyche, the id, the ego, the superego, and how they all work together, and how when we look at what those are and who Kizaru is, we can understand him as the little cynical, narcissistic little goblin that he acts like, that he represents in the story of One Piece. As Marine's justice was originally introduced in the series, on one side of that spectrum is absolute justice, heralded by Kainu, now Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, and the other side of that coin of justice would be lazy justice, or maybe I should put it as disillusioned justice. This was heralded by Admiral Akiji, and something similar to the ideology of justice for the members of SWORD, who have effectively resigned from the Navy so that they could follow their own orders and pursue their own justice, their own beliefs, their own system. Kizaru is somewhere in the middle of all that. And what does that mean to be in the middle or to have unclear justice? In a system, in the real world, in the world of One Piece, labels remove the psychological need to apply ideas and experiences to how we perceive the world. In a system like this, in the world like this, no matter how much it is insisted that these labels represent the truth of the world, it is actually just reduced to idealism, blended up into oversimplistic talking points. Justice. Justice is the ideology of the Marines, but as Doflamingo so accurately explains, justice is actually just a label for the exploiters to use on the exploited to reinforce their idealism, which also just happens to reinforce the oppression of the hierarchy in this world. Justice ultimately serves the top of the hierarchy, the Celestial Dragons, or if you take it one step further, Emu. There can't be a permanent change in the world until people work together in whatever way they can to overcome the machine that denies what Freud calls the id, their desire, their impulses. And the id that we're talking about here is as simple as food, water, shelter, things that we know people need in One Piece and in real life. And what a lot of people in the real world don't have, even if they have food, shelter, and water, is freedom. The ability to truly understand, know, pursue, and achieve dreams. The Celestial Dragons, the oppressors, they dehumanize Kizaru by turning him into a weapon. And Kizaru's internal psyche has been eroded so severely that he says himself that he is just a cog in the machine. Just let me do my job, man. I have to kill you, even though you just read some history. I don't have a choice. But they do have a choice. If Kizaru and the other Marines withhold their power, they have a real potential to change the conditions that they all exist under. And while Kizaru exists within that hierarchy in a place where he is largely removed from the most obvious visible exploitation, he is still exploited through his humanity. He's forced to participate in exploiting others on behalf of the Celestial Dragons, on behalf of the Five Elders, on behalf of Emu, an immortal demon, or something at least resembling a demon in terms of their existing humanity being completely eroded. And Kizaru is an old dog of the military, a member of the older generation, and has been. He's not like Luffy or Kobe, who sincerely want to change the world for the better. He doesn't believe in changing the world. He believes in surviving. So due to the depravity and amoralism to uphold the system, Freud would say that his psyche's self-preservation forces him to see the world in an idealistic way. Subconsciously, this cynical idealism feeds into itself, and ultimately this is how he became a cog in the machine. He became mostly unconscious, passive, an unfeeling gear in the system that exploits his friends, his quote-unquote enemies, and himself. in the Egghead Island arc, he feels like he has no choice in this system but to kill his best friend because that is justice. And so by doing that to himself, he's debasing himself. He's sinking further and further into his own grave, and he's using the shovel. Kizaru, as he is in the Egghead Island arc, annihilates himself. He has no hope for change. We would say that his unconscious mind has two options. He can go mad trying to change this system that he believes is unchangeable. He knows the system is wrong because it is deeply alienating. Kizaru himself is so alienated that he considers Dr. Vegapunk his best friend, even though he is completely willing to end his best friend's life if it means preserving his position in the current system. The system wants people like Kizaru, wants everybody, to believe they are alone, that you are not connected to these other people, that there are good guys and bad guys, pirates and marines. The system knows it can't survive if the oppressed collectively work together. It has to alienate them as its own form of self-preservation. Kizaru and practically everybody in the world of One Piece, regardless of labels, are oppressed under the sadistic, gluttonous, vain structure of Emu and the Celestial Dragons. And in Kizaru's case, the system broke this man. And let me explain to you how. Sigmund Freud's concepts of id, superego, and ego reveal what happened to Kizaru. The id is the unconscious psyche's source of basic impulses and drives. This can be super basic, like the needs of survival through shelter, food, and water, but it is also the source of our need for liberation, hope, and dreams. The superego is essentially morality. It is what you learn and believe from existence, authority figures, and culture. It is a learned system to ensure that the desires of the id are fed, satiated, pursued. There's some complexity there, as we'll get into, about what can happen to the id, what can happen to our desires, and how they can be transformed or disguised. And for people like Kizaru and people further down the line, their superego, their unconscious beliefs within the superego, tells them that the ends justify the means. Then we have the ego. It is the rationality of our mind, common sense maybe. It's strengthened through just perceiving the world, living a life, going places and seeing places. It's pieced together through observations, testing, judgments. The ego is rationality and common sense. Real or delusional, the id drives the ego's function. Our unconscious desires hunger to see and understand the world. The superego confines the ego's breadth. It limits what we can perceive, and because there are limits on what you can perceive, that means you have blind spots to reality. As I will be explaining soon, that is why Kizaru is unable to desire liberation. That is why Kizaru himself does not see a path forward to changing the world. The id drives the ego's function. Kizaru is difficult to describe without accepting that he's just seeking self-preservation. He's seeking to survive. He wants to secure his spot within this hierarchy. In our worldview, we know there is no rational reason for him to kill his friend. There's no reason not to question or disobey his orders. What makes him different from me? Well, his superego is his unconscious learned ideology, learned from the world, the culture, the experiences, his parents, and because of what the world has taught him, it is impossible for him to perceive and rationalize the real world that he's part of and have those be in sync. As a vice admiral or an admiral in the Navy, I feel like it's impossible to be so naive that you don't understand that the Celestial Dragons are not actually superior, that they're artificially placed at the top, that the machine itself gives them power over everybody else and is ultimately the greatest cause of exploitation and suffering in this world. He's in the system, so he observes the crimes of the Marines. He observes the crimes of the world government. He observes the crimes of the pirates. He knows of the heroism of many of the pirates. He knows of the depravity of the celestial dragons. And in this super oppressive, cruel world, the propaganda and the idealism of everything that supports this inhumanity that he sees with his own eyes and the trauma that he's actually experienced, they're just not compatible. They couldn't be. There's no way. What happens when the superego is eroded away into nothing? It destroys the limits on what we can perceive, which ultimately means that he could go good or he can go bad. And in terms of a Freudian analysis, I don't know how much of a choice that he has. So now he is stuck perceiving a reality that he psychologically cannot understand. And when he can't understand reality, that means something has to change. His desires have to change. Freud says when the psyche is overburdened, it manifests defense mechanisms as tools for self-preservation. And defense mechanisms reduce that tension and anxiety, which allows you to perceive a world that doesn't match a superego, because these defense mechanisms would steer you away from a conscious self-annihilation. I'm just doing my job. This hurts me too. I'm just a cog in the machine. Reality cannot change. Money, denial, projection, rationalization. They transform the ego, the unconscious drives, desires, and impulses that are perceived as threatening. Consciously, we don't want to annihilate ourselves. What would Kizaru's threatening unconscious drives and impulses be before they disguise themselves to psychologically preserve himself as a bully within this horrible, horrible system? It's something that's unique to all of humanity, especially humanity that's in this system, in this struggle. Liberation, hope, dreams. He's annihilated without food, shelter, or water, so it's got to be the alternative. Liberation, hope, and dreams. That is why Kizaru feels so empty. His internal drives that we all personally know to be real within ourselves, that we see embodied in Luffy, they're missing. They're transformed or hiding within his psyche. Now, obviously, Luffy's position in this system is to challenge the apex of this hierarchy. And one of the ways he challenges it is that Luffy's mere existence brings the possibility of rediscovering that impulse for freedom. And giving into that desire is what scares the celestial dragons and Emu more than anything. That is why Mihawk says Luffy's greatest power is his ability to draw others toward him, to make people follow him, to make people want to help him. And giving into that desire is what scares the celestial dragons and Emu more than anything. They can rebuild their superego, their understanding of what reality can be, which ultimately colors their perceptions and changes their actions. What Freud would say about Kizaru is that he succumbed to his transformed desires, impulses, and now he unconsciously has the desire to destroy himself because he's ashamed of his lack of courage to do what he knows needs to be done. He knows what the system is, he just thinks he's a good cop. He's not a bad apple, he tells himself. He's a net good in a rotten world. And this is cynicism. It's a poison, or maybe a medicine for those that cannot deal with the reality that they see. I'll leave that to you. And how this cynicism presents itself to a Marine like Kizaru is, justifying his actions through the belief, through the ideology, that he's never been wrong to presume the worst. It sounds logical, right? It's a safe bet, but it's not logic. It's his superego. It is an unconscious, forced, possibly false painting of the possibilities to protect himself because of the real trauma the system inflicted into him. If you're not catching what I'm putting down, this is why the older generation struggles to change the system. That's why the newer generations are so powerful. The older generations, in terms of self-preservation, need to believe in the system that benefits them. And for a non-celestial dragon, Kizaru, he's got a pretty cozy spot in the hierarchy, all things considered, for not being a celestial dragon himself. Now, what this means is very interesting, because regardless if Kizaru or anyone else is right or wrong, believing in a system means you are taking a leap of faith. Kizaru's leap is unconscious. His defense mechanisms tell him he has no choice, that he's a cog in the machine. But then there's Luffy again confronting that reality. Luffy and the Straw Hats, they contradict that by taking a conscious, or maybe unconscious, leap of faith in the system that they've developed through their experiences and confined within their drives of freedom and perceptions of the vast world they've seen and experienced. They're the embodiment of another path forward, of another system, of another world. The tragedy of Kizaru is that he's taken a leap of faith into a cruel system that exploits him without knowing that is what he's doing to himself, that he's annihilating himself. What a fascinating contradiction. A conscious desire of self-preservation led Kizaru to unconsciously annihilating himself. And he's destroying himself because most of what he is a lie at this point. It's not real. It's like the fucking tooth fairy. His defense mechanisms tell him he has no choice. He's a cog in the machine after all. He's just doing his job, guys. He could feasibly take a leap in the same direction as Luffy, but the psyches of the old generation is completely out of balance, creating illusions on top of illusions to achieve self-preservation. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, leave a comment, let me know what you thought. If you want to financially support me, check out my Patreon link in the description. You can support me there for as low as $1. But if you can't or don't want to, don't worry. I appreciate you watching regardless. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.